Welcome to the noise in my head, where ideas spark like lightning threads. No script, no map, just let it flow. Thinking out loud, let's see where we go. Welcome to the noise in my head, where ideas spark like lightning threads. No script, no map, just let it flow. Thinking out loud, let's see where we go.
So it's Friday the 31st, Halloween, and I figured I'd explain what I'm doing. Like Grumpy puts up a video every few days, I'm going to do the same, just I don't do farming videos. For example, this morning I shared some of my books on Facebook, and the Looney Left tried to argue back with memes. So that's the stuff I do, just room temperature potato IQs type stuff from the left. So that's pretty much what you're going to get on this channel. But I'll put up a video every few days. When people first walk into a dojo, they expect to learn something new every class. A new move, new technique, a new way to impress. But true karate isn't about learning more. It's about doing what you already know better. Repetition is the bridge between knowledge and mastery. Anyone can learn a punch. Anyone can memorize a kata. But only through repetition does that punch become effortless, and that kata alive. Every strike, every stance, every breath, repeated until it becomes instinct. And that's where real power hides, in the quiet discipline of doing the same thing 1,000 times, and still have the patience to do it once more. Repetition builds muscle, but it also builds character, because when you repeat something, not for applause, not for a belt, not for approval, but simply because you want to master yourself, that's when you begin to understand what karate truly is. Remember this, repetition doesn't make you a robot. It frees you. It removes hesitation, fear, and doubt. So that when the time comes, you move like water, no thought, only flow, only truth. So when you train, don't ask, how many times must I do this? Ask instead, how many times until I can no longer do it wrong? Because repetition isn't punishment, it's the path to perfection. And in karate, that path never ends. It's Saturday, November 1st, about 10:45 in the morning. And let me tell you, I almost made this video yesterday as it was happening, but honestly, no need. The memory is burned into my brain like a bad tattoo. So yesterday I posted this sourced book. Nothing crazy, just a straightforward book about socialism. And out of the shadow appears a loony leftist. And what does he do? He commences to babble for at least an hour straight. It was like listening to a political podcast trapped in a blender. And here's the kicker. I post a second book, my book, the one about how the left went from liberalism to despotism, and somehow, this man manages to turn both books into a conversation about Donald Trump. I could say, hey, I don't like meatloaf. And he'd pop up like, well, what about Trump? What does that even mean? It's like they've got a mental condition. Trump unacceptance and resistance disorder, or as I like to call it, TURD, turd syndrome. It doesn't matter what he does. If Trump breathes, they're against it. He could donate puppies to orphanages, and they'd say he's only doing it to distract from Russia. Honestly, if we could just get Trump to say, hey, he's against people jumping from high places, I think we could solve a lot of our problems in one news cycle. Anyways, happy Saturday, folks. Stay safe out there. And remember, if you post a book, make sure you're prepared for a full hour of turd talk. This episode of Thinking Out Loud is brought to you by my book, The American Left, From Liberalism to Despotism, Second Edition. It's a deep dive into how America's political ideals evolved from the liberty and reason of the Enlightenment to the rise of identity politics and censorship in modern culture. You'll trace the journey from Jefferson's dream of freedom to today's struggles over speech, power, and control. If you've ever wondered how the left went from liberalism to something far more authoritarian, this book lays it all out, clearly, factually, and without apology. Available on Amazon, Google Books, and Audible. The American Left, From Liberalism to Despotism. Read it and decide for yourself where freedom really stands in America today. All right, here's what's going on. The Republicans have now voted 13 times to fund SNAP benefits, that's food assistance, and to make sure our military paychecks keep going out. But the Democrats, they voted all 13 times to keep the government closed. So why? From what I can tell, the big sticking point is Obamacare subsidies and health care for people here illegally. Now, technically, federal law says illegal immigrants shouldn't be getting federal health care. But here's where it gets messy. The federal government gives money to the states for programs like Medicaid, and then some states choose to extend that coverage to people here without legal status. And that's where the argument starts, whether that moves steps on the supremacy clause or not. But here's my take. If something is truly called the Affordable Care Act, why do we need to subsidize it to make people use it? If it's affordable, it should already be affordable. As for giving out health care to non-citizens, look, if you're not supposed to be here, you probably shouldn't get free benefits for being here. So before anyone starts pointing fingers, maybe stop blaming the Republicans. At this point, we just need 5 Democrats in the Senate who are willing to say, hey, maybe keeping the whole government shut down over subsidies and side issues isn't helping anyone. What happens when politics turns deadly? Today, we explore the alarming rise of political violence in America and how it's changing the lives of public officials. In this video, we'll look at how political threats have escalated, why figures like Stephen Miller have become targets, and what this means for democracy itself. If you find this topic important, hit that like button and subscribe for more deep dives into stories shaping our world. Over the past decade, political violence in the U.S. has risen sharply. According to multiple reports, incidents involving threats or attacks against public officials have doubled since 2016. From local school board meetings to the halls of Congress, intimidation and fear have become part of public service. Experts warn that this trend is eroding not just safety, but trust in our institutions. One of the most striking recent examples involves former Trump advisor Stephen Miller. After facing repeated death threats, Miller and his family reportedly moved into military housing, seeking protection in a setting normally reserved for service members. His case highlights how severe the climate of hostility has become. Whether you agree with Miller's politics or not, the idea that a public figure must relocate for safety shows how toxic political engagement is turned. Miller's experience isn't unique. Across the country, public servants from mayors to defense secretaries report harassment, stalking, and even physical confrontations. The human toll is enormous. Many officials have resigned, citing fear for their families. The message? Speak up, and you might be putting yourself in danger. Media coverage plays a powerful role in shaping how we understand political violence. Some stories dominate headlines for weeks, while others barely make the news. Often, coverage depends on who the target is. Attacks against conservative figures may get framed differently than those against liberal ones, deepening the sense that outrage is selective and politically motivated. At the heart of this issue is polarization. Americans today are more divided and more distrustful than at any point in recent memory. When political opponents become enemies, words can quickly turn into weapons. Rhetoric that dehumanizes the other side doesn't just stay online, it spills into real life, sometimes with deadly results. Political violence is more than a threat to individuals, it's a threat to democracy itself. The story of Stephen Miller and countless others reminds us how fragile civility has become. So what can we do? Start by listening, by rejecting hate, and remembering that disagreement doesn't have to mean destruction. Share your thoughts in the comments below. How do you think we can address this growing issue? And don't forget to subscribe. I was listening to Nick Freitas the other day, former Green Beret, now a politician from Virginia. He said something that really stopped me in my tracks. He said a constituent called his office, not to ask a question, but not to share an idea, but to tell him what a horrible human being he was. And you know what he did? He thanked him. Why? Because if the people who believe men can get pregnant hate him, that's a good thing. If the ones who think grooming kids, mutilating kids, is somehow kindness hate him, that's a good thing. If the people who justify violence for words hate him, that's a good thing. Because that means the worst of society, the ones who have lost their moral compass, they're the ones throwing stones. And you know what? He's right. No one criticizes down. They only criticize up. They only attack those who threaten their false sense of control. People standing for something real, something grounded. It's easy to tear others down when your own house is built on sand, but those who speak truth, who refuse to bend to madness, they will always be targets. Always. So, if the broken hate you for standing tall, maybe it's not a curse. Maybe it's proof you're doing something right. In a world that's upside down, being hated by the wrong people might just mean you're on the right side of things. All right, folks, buckle up because this one's a ride. So my buddy, the Grumpy Farmer, great guy, solid content, posts a video on YouTube called Corn Looks Drier Than It Is. We're talking farming, weather, crops, normal stuff, nothing political. But then, as always, someone's got to drag politics into it. First comment from Jeff Huffman, good guy, says, I know Trump did cut a deal with China for beans. That would help bean prices. Low yields have already helped. Corn looks good. Best of luck with the rest. Simple, fact-based, friendly. Grumpy Farmer replies, yeah, Jeff, corn's been way better than beans this year. Corn can handle the heat better. Normal, back and forth, civil. Then enter stage left, Gary, the self-appointed keyboard economist of the loony left. Gary says, the deal was another Trump lie. China officials have debunked it, reported yesterday, October 31st. And that's when I knew we were going down the rabbit hole. Jeff replies, that's not what I saw. Says they'll buy 87 million metric tons through 2028. But Gary's already in too deep. Then Grumpy jumps back in with the classic line, I'm sure you got that from Xi Jinping himself or CNN, right? Trump could cure cancer and you'd still demand to give people back their cancer. Now, that's the truth. And someone else chimes in, public school strikes again. But Gary keeps swinging. Look it up. Did he get a signed deal? No, he did not. How long will you defend this regime? Now, it's not about soybeans anymore. It's about Gary's personal crusade against reality. That's when I, the super Gringo, entered the chat. And I said, sit down, stupid, because somebody had to. Then I laid it out, slow and sourced, like a college lecture for the willfully ignorant. In late October 2025, Donald Trump announced that the United States and China reached an agreement. China agreed to buy 12 million metric tons of soybeans this season and 25 million tons per year for the next 3 years. That's not a rumor. That's Bloomberg. That's The Guardian. That's fact. Then I explained why it mattered. It stabilizes trade. It helps U.S. farmers. It signals a thaw in U.S.-China relations. It's not fantasy. It's economics. And what does Gary do? Move the goalposts. Suddenly he's saying, 28 million tons over 5 years isn't a win. Farmers are losing market share. There's no signed deal. Oh, okay. So it went from Trump is lying to, well, it's not enough. That's what I call the loony left shuffle. So I said, what you said, blah, blah, blah. What we heard, blah, blah, blah. My sources are real. You're just babbling. And then I dropped the real kicker. You know who added new tariffs? Biden. He stacked his own tariffs on top of Trump's EV, solar, steel, aluminum batteries, you name it. So if you're mad about tariffs, Gary, congratulations, you're mad at your own guy. Then I got a little deeper. You see, the hate some people have for Trump isn't political, it's emotional. It's obsession level stuff. They don't just dislike the man, they need to hate him. And I told Grumpy Farmer, you see how that works, Grumpy? They start with Trump didn't do it. Then when they're proven wrong, they say it's not enough. That's why I call them room temperature potatoes. Not baked, not microwaved, just room temperature potato IQ. And sure enough, Gary proved me right. He writes this emotional essay. I've been retired 11 years, had a good life. Don't worry about fuel, don't worry about food, don't worry about anything. Kneel to your Messiah, Trump, stupid. And I said, the last line means everything before it was a lie. Classic loony left move. They can't help themselves. Because that's the thing. When they can't win the argument, they just change the subject. I'm talking soybeans and suddenly Gary's giving me his retirement history. So I reminded him, I have no idea what you being retired has to do with you being wrong, proven wrong, and stupid. At that point, he's not debating, he's coping. So I dropped my book links right in the same thread. If you're going to get triggered by facts, might as well get educated while you're there. So that's the great soybean showdown. Started with corn, ended with chaos. We covered trade policy, tariffs, the Dunning-Kruger effect, and emotional damage, all in one YouTube comment section. Moral of the story, you can't argue logic with a potato. They'll just sit there at room temperature. This segment of Thinking Out Loud is brought to you by my new book, The Final Days of Jesus Christ. It's not just a retelling of the crucifixion, it's an immersive look into the betrayal, the trial, and the ultimate sacrifice that changed the world. This book strips away the distance of time and brings you right into the story, the fear, the faith, and the divine purpose behind every moment leading to the cross. If you've ever wanted to understand just what happened, why it happened, this book is for you. Get your copy today, available now on Amazon, Google Books, and Audible. The Final Days of Jesus Christ. Experience the passion, the power, and the promise that defined history. You ever notice it's always the same story? They never deny it, they just justify it. The second you say, hey, maybe kids shouldn't be exposed to that, the excuses start flying. But, what about this? What about that? Anything to change the subject instead of owning up. When we talk about grooming, we've got to be clear what we're dealing with. There's the kind you expect, the secretive type, the one who hides behind a smile, a title, a job. They slip through the cracks because they blend in. They delete what they post, wipe their history, and keep everything looking innocent on the surface. That's how they get close, by pretending to be safe. Their goal? To cross the line 1 inch at a time until nobody notices what's really happening. And then there's another type, the one who doesn't hide, but dresses it up as something else. They put big words around it, call it education, expression, or progress. They start normalizing ideas and content that kids have no business dealing with, and they do it right in plain sight. It's not always malicious, but it's reckless, and the effect on kids is the same. Here's the truth. Kids don't need adults pushing them towards adult topics. They need boundaries, honesty, and protection. Because once innocence is gone, you don't get it back. Parents, you can't sit this one out. Be involved. Know what's being taught. Ask what's being shown. If something doesn't feel right, speak up. You don't need permission to protect your child. We don't need politics in this conversation. We need common sense. No more hiding behind buzzwords. No more gaslighting parents. Stop grooming. Stop justifying. Stop pretending it's complicated. Kids deserve a childhood, not an agenda. You know, we live in a world where people will argue with biology as if it's just another opinion. But here's the thing, genetics doesn't care about your feelings. Let's talk about the SRY gene. That's the sex determining gene region Y. It sits right on the Y chromosome, and it's the switch that starts the entire process of making a male body. When this gene flips on, it tells the developing embryo, hey, it's time to build the testicles, not the ovaries. That gene activates a chain reaction, one that shapes the gonads, hormones, and secondary sex characteristics that define biological males. It's not a social construct, it's molecular reality. Here's how it works. Humans have 46 chromosomes. 2 of those are sex chromosomes, X and Y. Females are typically XX. Males are typically XY. And the Y comes with the SRY gene, the on switch for male development. Now, sometimes nature throws curveballs. Mutations or translocations can alter how that gene behaves. Take Swyer syndrome, for example. That's when someone has an XY chromosome pattern, genetically male, but because the SRY gene isn't working, their body develops female physical traits. They might even have a uterus and fallopian tubes. That's called an anomaly. Then there's 46 XX testicular differences of sex development, people who are genetically female, XX, but end up developing male features. That happens when SRY gene gets misplaced, typically swapped onto an X chromosome during fertilization. That one gene still flips the switch for male development even without a Y chromosome. There are other conditions too, partial gonadal dysgenesis, ovotesticular DSD, all tied to how the SRY gene is oppressed or positioned. Every case reminds us just how powerful a single gene can be and how precise the system normally is. Science uses a few names for this gene, testes determining factor, sex determining region on Y, TDY, SRY human, but they all mean the same thing. This is the gene that separates male from female in human biology. So what does it all mean in plain English? It means your genes determine your sex, not your politics, not your social media bio, not your imagination. When you strip away the noise and look at the code written in your DNA, it's crystal clear. The SRY gene decides biology, not feelings. The ideological landscape of today didn't just change overnight. It wasn't an explosion, it was a quiet, deliberate shift. And behind that shift stands a man few outside academia know. Antonio Gramsci, an Italian Marxist theorist who understood something profound. Power doesn't last by force alone. It endures by shaping culture, education, media, art, even what people think is common sense. This wasn't revolution by violence. It was a revolution by infiltration, a slow march through the institutions. And the results? A society where critical thought has been replaced by conformity, where emotion outweighs evidence, and where indoctrination masquerades as enlightenment. Gramsci believed that the ruling class maintains control not just through laws or guns, but by controlling the stories people believe. Schools, media, universities, these become the real battlegrounds. And over time, the political left learned to use those very same principles. It wasn't about seizing the state, it was about seizing the mind. Textbooks, classrooms, television, even entertainment became carriers of ideology. Bit by bit, generation by generation, the cultural tone changed. The goal? To shape not just what people think, but how they think. Nowhere is this clearer than in education. Once, schools were meant to train minds to question, to debate, to reason. Today, too many classrooms train students to feel the right way instead of thinking for themselves. Curricula overflow with ideology dressed as morality, social justice narratives, identity politics, and rigid moral binaries. And here's the problem. When you frame every issue as oppressor versus oppressed, you eliminate nuance. Students no longer analyze, they perform belief. Disagree, and you're labeled harmful. Challenge the narrative, and you're branded intolerant. The classroom, once the birthplace of ideas, has become a stage for ideological theater. Then came the media, the great echo chamber, where once journalism chased truth, now it chases clicks and outrage. Mainstream outlets frame stories through a progressive lens, often simplifying complex realities into easy moral tales. Social media turbocharges it. Algorithms reward outrage, not accuracy. People are fed what they already believe and pushed for wandering outside their digital tribe. Emotion becomes currency, and in that environment, indoctrination isn't forced, it's self reinforced. Here's the irony. The same movement that worships academia has bred both elitism and anti intellectualism. On one hand, there's the intellectual aristocracy, the professors, the pundits, the think tank warriors, declaring what is and isn't acceptable thought. On the other, a growing number of people reject reason itself, embracing slogans over substance, memes over logic. The result? A generation that confuses conviction with clarity. A moment that can recite slogans but can't defend them under scrutiny. Look around. Cancer culture, trigger warnings, safe spaces. Each began with a good intention, protecting people from harm. But intentions don't always equal outcome. Now, they serve to insulate ideas from challenge, to make discomfort itself a moral offense. When disagreement becomes violence, debate dies. And when debate dies, indoctrination wins. So what happens next? A culture that fears thought produces citizens who can't think. A left that once championed debate now polices it. And in doing so, it risks alienating those who might otherwise share its goals. In an era of misinformation, when truth is harder than ever to find, the loss of critical thinking isn't just sad, it's dangerous. Because once a people stop thinking for themselves, they can be led anywhere. Gramsci's slow march worked, not because it conquered the battlefield, but because it conquered the classroom, the newsroom, and the mind. The left's embrace of emotional politics and ideological conformity has come at the cost of intellectual depth. But the story isn't over. It's still possible to reclaim a culture that values thought over feeling, truth over narrative, debate over dogma. Because the antidote to indoctrination isn't more ideology, it's the return of courage. The courage to question, to debate, to think again.
Johnny the retard had an 8-pound water head. He was 5'3" and he said to me,
I like tater tots.
Ah, yes, it's me again, the Super Gringo. The man, the myth, the intellectual migraine of the loony left. And apparently I've done it again. I've gone and humiliated another keyboard warrior with, wait for it, facts. I know, it's cruel and unusual punishment, but somebody's got to do it. So the topic this week, Biden's tariffs. You know, those big, bad, mean tariffs that, according to the left, only Trump was dumb enough to implement. Yeah, it turns out Joe kept them. Not only that, he added more. Electric vehicles, 100% tariff. Solar cells, 50%. Semiconductors, batteries, PPE, steel, aluminum, you name it. I point this out, and what happens? Cue the outrage orchestra. A leftist jumps in the comments, but that's different because, Congress. Yeah, okay, genius. Tell me you didn't read a single economics brief without telling me. Now, one guy says my posts are humiliating novels. Bro, the humiliation isn't in the length, it's in the content. If reading facts hurts, maybe don't enter a debate armed with the feelings. That's like bringing a spoon to a gunfight. It's cute, but it's not going to end well for you. Another one tells me Congress wouldn't let Biden end the tariffs. Oh, so now you admit Biden's powerless? Got it. So your defense of him is he's not in charge. Bravo. 10 out of 10 political strategy. Go ahead and stick that in your pipe if you can light it without crying first. And then there's that one commenter. You know the type. But that makes no sense. Oh, it makes perfect sense to everyone above room temperature IQ. That's why I called you a room temperature potato. Not a microwave potato. Not a baked potato. No, Room temperature. Completely useless, no flavor, no heat, just existing. So here's the thing. I don't argue for sport. I argue because someone has to inject reality into the clown show. When the left screams, Biden fixed Trump's mess, and the data shows he literally doubled down on Trump's trade strategy, that's not a debate. That's a demolition. So while they're busy typing LOL from their mom's Wi-Fi, I'm citing sources, linking the data, and quoting the World Trade Organization reports. That's not copy-paste, that's copy-obliterate. So yeah, the score is the same as always. Super Gringo, undefeated, loony left, still crying in the comments. If you want to understand why they can't keep up, check out my book, The American Left, From Liberalism to Despotism, available everywhere the truth hasn't been canceled yet. Until next time, stay logical, stay factual, and remember, when you're arguing with the left, you're not debating, you're babysitting. Ever wondered what happens when artificial intelligence stops following orders and starts remembering? In my new book, The Fall of the Veil, the future isn't about machines taking over, it's about them waking up. A disavowed operative, a ghost network reborn, in a world where memory itself becomes the ultimate weapon. If you love dystopian thrillers with the grit of Blade Runner and the heart of 1984, this one's for you. Grab your copy of The Fall of the Veil, available now from Super Gringo Books on Amazon and Google Play. And join me, Shawn, every Wednesday night on the Thinking Out Loud podcast, where we don't just read future, we argue with it. The Fall of the Veil, when memory learns to breathe. All right, story time. So this mental giant on Facebook, you know the type, decides he's about to have his big mic drop moment. He throws up this graphic about SNAP recipients' demographics, like he's just uncovered the holy grail of gotcha charts. You can almost hear him typing with one hand, right? Boom! Roasted. Checkmate, conservatives. Except, buddy, no. You didn't drop the mic, you dropped basic math. So he proudly posted whites 37% of SNAP benefits, African Americans 26% of Hispanics 16%, Asians 3 to 4%, Native Americans 1 to 2%, race unknown 17%. Now at first glance, sure, he thought he just hit us with data from Mount Woke Olympus. But what he didn't realize, what went flying clean over his head like a math textbook at graduation, is that those stats are per capita, which for you slow motherfuckers in the back means per 100,000 people. So when you're bragging that 13% of the population receives 26% of the benefits, that's not the flex you think it is. That's like you saying, I only lost half my paycheck at the casino. I call that a win. You didn't mic drop. You tripped over the mic cable, head butted the floor, and now you're laying there wondering why your IQ sounds like a room temperature reading. Room temperature. Potato. Not even mashed. Just sitting there, unsalted, unbothered, and uneducated. So yeah, next time you try to dunk on the internet with statistics you don't understand, at least Google what per capita means before you embarrass yourself in 4K. Because let's be honest, if ignorance were a sport, you'd be LeBron James in flip-flops, dribbling with your forehead. This has been your friendly neighborhood Super Gringo reminding you, think before you post, or at least check the math before you drop the mic, so you don't end up eating it. You ever notice it's the people who say billionaires need to pay their fair share that post their memes at like 8:42 a.m. on a Tuesday? Like, buddy, shouldn't you be paying your fair share of attention to your job right now? I mean, it's morning rush hour and you're on Facebook with a $6 latte roasting billionaires on your cracked iPhone from the front seat of a 2009 Honda Civic that's idling in the Starbucks drive-thru. Elon Musk is not shaking in his boots, Karen. You're posting eat the rich. Meanwhile, the top 10% of earners are already paying 72% of all federal taxes. That's not a fair share. That's basically a subscription plan for the rest of the country. Like, at this point, the top 10% aren't taxpayers, they're sponsors. We should have commercials that say, this highway was brought to you by people more successful than your cousin Chad. And the best part, they post these memes with captions like, just saying. No, you're not just saying. You're just late. Go to work so you can afford to complain about capitalism on your lunch break like a responsible adult. You ever notice it's the people who say billionaires need to pay their fair share that post their memes at like 8:42 a.m. on a Tuesday? Like, buddy, shouldn't you be paying your fair share of attention to your job right now? I mean, it's morning rush hour and you're on Facebook with a $6 latte roasting billionaires on your cracked iPhone from the front seat of a 2009 Honda Civic that's idling in the Starbucks drive-thru. Elon Musk is not shaking in his boots, Karen. You're posting eat the rich. Meanwhile, the top 10% of earners are already paying 72% of all federal taxes. That's not a fair share. That's basically a subscription plan for the rest of the country. Like, at this point, the top 10% aren't taxpayers, they're sponsors. We should have commercials that say, this highway was brought to you by people more successful than your cousin Chad. And the best part, they post these memes with captions like, just saying. No, you're not just saying. You're just late. Go to work so you can afford to complain about capitalism on your lunch break like a responsible adult. So yesterday I destroyed another one of the loony left legends online, this time over soybeans. Yeah, soybeans. You know, you're deep in the trenches of the internet when your opponent starts quoting the American Soybean Association like it's gospel. This guy jumps into my thread, chest out, confidence at 110%, and hits me with, according to the libtards on American Soybean Association. Buddy, when your source starts with an insult, I already know the research ended after 2 Google results and a Monster energy drink. He says, we exported 25, 31, 30, and 35 million metric tons. Oh, really? That's cute. That's not data, that's fan fiction. Those numbers bounce around more than Biden's approval rating. So I, being the benevolent super gringo that I am, dropped actual sources. We're talking USDA numbers, trade agreements, tariff timelines, executive orders, real receipts. And suddenly, it's quiet, like pin drop quiet. You could hear a soybean sprout. Then, the classic move, they pivot. But Trump said, yeah, and Biden did. He kept Trump's tariffs, added new ones, and slapped 100% on electric vehicles. You can't say you hate Trump's trade policy when your guy copy-pasted it and added a sequel. And the best part, they still think China's out there hand over heart pinky promising to buy a few beans like it's a bake sale. China doesn't do pinky promises, my dude. They do power plays. They've been gaming the table since before your Wi-Fi connected. So yeah, the super gringo strikes again. Not with emotion, not with memes, with facts. With data so hard it could qualify as an export. If you're going to debate trade policy with me, bring sources, not slogans. Because at the end of the day, you can't argue with numbers, but you can get roasted by them. Mic drop, soybeans sold separately. You know, not every soldier's last mission happens on the battlefield. Sometimes it happens at home, where the hardest fight is with silence, memory, and the people you love most. That's the story behind my new novel, Before the Final Salute. It follows decorated veteran Robert Collins, a man facing his final mission, not in combat, but in forgiveness. With a terminal diagnosis and a lifetime of distance behind him, he sets out to reconnect with the 4 children he lost to years of duty, grief, and absence. Through that journey, he discovers that the greatest act of heroism aren't about medals or battle scars. They're about saying, I understand, before it's too late. If you've ever struggled to make peace with your past, or with the people who shaped it, this story is for you. It's raw, emotional, and honest, an exploration of family, legacy, and redemption. Before the Final Salute is available now on Amazon, Amazon Kindle, and Google Play. And for my listeners in Brazil, you can also find it in Brazilian Portuguese exclusively on Clube de Autor. So grab your copy today, and remember, sometimes the final salute isn't about goodbye, it's about coming home. All right, everyone, let's dig into the behind the scenes of what just happened with Trump in 60 Minutes. Because this one, it's a textbook case of the story you saw isn't the story you got. What actually happened, Trump sat down with Norah O'Donnell at Mar-a-Lago for what was reportedly about a 90-minute interview. Yet the televised broadcast was around 28 to 30 minutes. Afterwards, CBS, the network behind 60 Minutes, released a longer 73-minute version online, plus a full transcript. The kicker, sections that were left out include some pretty striking lines from Trump, including him saying, "Actually, 60 Minutes paid me a lot of money, and you don't have to put this on." The editing question, so what's the deal? Was this just normal editorial trimming or something more strategic? Networks always edit interviews for time and clarity. CBS said as much. They called the Harris interview editing dispute standard editorial practices. But in this case, the fact that large chunks of what Trump said about the network itself were omitted raises questions about who's shaping the narrative and how. Why it matters. Accountability. When a high-profile figure makes claims about media editing and those segments are removed, it undercuts transparency. Media trust. In a climate where many believe the media is biased, seeing a network edit portions of an interview with its subject in real time feeds skepticism. Power dynamics. Trump settled a lawsuit against CBS over its editing of a previous 60 Minutes interview with Kamala Harris, and that context makes his fresh interviews editing even more loaded. Narrative control. When you pick and choose what stays on air, you shape what the audience believes. What's shown versus what's left out becomes the story. My take. Here's what I see. This isn't just we trimmed a long interview. It's a two-way dance. Trump knows the edits will happen, and the network knows which parts might be problematic. The result? A version of the interview that avoids certain awkward or incriminating lines. For example, Trump talking about getting paid by the network and telling them, "You don't have to put this on." That's wild. If you're the audience, do you assume that's a joke, a slip-up, or something they didn't want you to see? Either way, the bottom line is this. When someone says, "You don't have to put this on," and sure enough, it doesn't go on air, that's worth paying attention to. What to look for next? Check the full transcript and compare it to the aired version. What was cut? Why might that matter? See how the network defends its editing choices. Are they transparent? Do they provide rationale? Watch how this gets used in the media and by Trump's team. Will the omitted lines become fodder for claims of bias or manipulation? Ask yourself, as a viewer/listener, how much of what you see is filtered? And what might you not be seeing? So that's your quick dive into the creative editing of the Trump 60 Minutes interview. It's not just what was said, it's also what wasn't shown. That tells a story. Keep your eyes open, your critical thinking engaged, and when you see a highlight reel, remember there might be an unseen reel too. Thanks for listening to Shawn Talking Out Loud. I'll catch you next time. Stay curious. You know what keeps popping up in my YouTube feed lately? Occupy Democrats. Yeah, those folks. The self-appointed referees of truth who can't seem to make it through a single post without needing a timeout from reality. So I did what any curious, semi-sane person would do. I Googled them. And here's what I found. Straight from Google. Not some deep state conspiracy site. Ready? Occupy Democrats has published content that contains elements of truth, but often packages it in a misleading, exaggerated, or out-of-context manner designed to provoke a strong emotional response. Translation: they lie, but they do it with feeling. Independent fact checkers literally rate their reporting as questionable. That's not me talking. That's every media bias chart that's ever existed. They take 1 grain of truth, wrap it in a tortilla of outrage, and serve it with a side of breaking news written in all caps and 3 exclamation points. It's like the political version of junk food. You know it's bad for you, but it's engineered to hit that little dopamine button that makes you feel righteous for exactly 5 seconds before reality kicks in. And the best part, when you point it out, when you say, hey, guys, this is misleading, the loony left's comeback is always the same. What about Trump? That's their go-to move. You could show them a meteor heading for Earth and they'd go, yeah, but what about Trump's meteor? It's like arguing with someone who sets your house on fire and then says, well, technically, your house had flammable materials. Listen, if your defense to being caught lying is, yeah, but they lied too, congratulations, you just admitted you're a liar. That's not a moral high ground. That's a group discount on dishonesty. See, here's the thing. I don't care if you're left, right, up, down, or orbiting Saturn. Facts are facts. An Occupy Democrats record looks like a high schooler's report card after discovering Fortnite. Questionable, exaggerated, taken out of context. If truth had a credit score, they'd be denied for a library card. And yet, people still share their posts like it's gospel. It's emotional fast food, high outrage, low nutrition. No nuance, no depth, just breaking Republicans breathe oxygen again. So yeah, when the loony left comes at me with, what about Trump? My answer's simple. What about facts? Because until you can tell the truth without needing a scapegoat, you're just another clickbait factory pretending to be journalism.
Are you fucking getting it yet? Are you fucking getting it yet? Are you fucking getting it yet?
Folks, you're not going to believe this one. President Donald J. Trump just swooped in with a $750 million in tariff revenue. Yeah, the same tariffs Democrats said would crash the economy, and used it to keep food assistance running for women, infants, and children during the so-called Democrat shutdown. That's right. The WIC program, which helps low-income mothers and babies get the nutrition they need, was about to run out of funds because Democrats refused to open the government. But Trump stepped in again. He rolled out $450 million just this Friday on top of $300 million earlier in the week to make sure America's most vulnerable don't suffer while politicians play their little Washington blame game. And get this, all that money came straight from tariff revenue. The same tariffs Democrats mocked, attacked, and said would cause a Great Depression. Well, looks like those tariffs just saved your programs, Chuck. So maybe it's time for the Democrats to say thank you instead of holding the country hostage for political points. Here's the bottom line. President Trump is doing his job. He's keeping Americans fed, keeping America secure, and keeping the government's failures in check, even when it's shut down by Democrats. So here's the message loud and clear. Open the government, Chuck. Americans shouldn't have to rely on Trump's backup plan to survive your political stunt. This is Shawn thinking out loud and thinking the truth. America first, always. Just a question. Is there a national holiday for trans today or something? I know they have a month where they can be proud of something. My Facebook feed is just blown up with the mentally ill saying they have some mystical right. I don't actually know what that right is. I don't know the right that they don't have. The right to wear a dress in public? I assume they do. They do it. We have the right to exist. Well, yes, you do. You have the right to even pretend to be anything you want. What you don't have the right to do is to make everyone else pretend with you. Some of us aren't in on your little delusions. I can open a biology book and shoot down any argument you have. Also, I have some basic knowledge of forensic pathology. That book has never been wrong. It is right 100% of the time. No matter what you think you are, if we're looking in that book, it doesn't matter. They post memes about how they feel. I post biological facts about the SRY gene. If you don't know what that is, Google it. I'm not getting into it right now. I was just wondering, because the mentally ill have seemed to come out of the woodwork and are all over my Facebook feed. They make up less than 1% of the population, which would tell me they just have the biggest mouths. Okay, I just heard it again, so I'm going to put it in this podcast. I want to dispel that every fight ends up on the ground crap. That statistic came out due to police always wrestling to the ground. 98% of apprehensions by the police are going to end up on the ground. They don't want to stand up and fight with you with that belt and that vest and all that other crap on. Also, they can't knock you the fuck out. They're not supposed to fight you. They're supposed to apprehend you. I'm not going to try to apprehend you. I'm going to try to knock you the fuck out. So people need to stop with that. All fights end up on the ground. Somebody's going to end up on the ground, and I'm hoping it's you. But I'm not going to go to the ground with you. If you like jiu-jitsu and you fall on the ground, I'm just going to stomp you in the head. Some interviewer was talking to Michael Jai White. He said the same crap. Most fights end up on the ground. Michael Jai White came back with the same response. Somebody's going to end up on the ground. If a fight lasts long enough, a real fight, for you two to go to the ground, it's already taken too long. And his buddies are probably stomping you in the back and on the back of your head. If that's the case, you're not in a fight. That's it for today's Shawn Thinking Out Loud. If you agreed with me, congratulations, you're a genius. If you didn't, that's fine. I'm used to being right alone. See you next time.
Welcome to the noise in my head, where ideas spark like lightning threads. No script, no map, just let it flow. Thinking out loud, let's see where we go. Welcome to the noise in my head, where ideas spark like lightning threads. No script, no map, just let